So I just finished watching a video from Team APS's second channel, where Paul, shout out to you, did a quick discussion video giving his thoughts on the Yu-Gi-Oh! The Chronicles Sky Strikers anime, episode 1. So I actually did a video not too long ago talking about basically why the anime was more or less going to disappoint people. And you can kind of consider this a part 2, if anything. This is going to be kind of a breakdown of where to go from here, because the particular point that was trying what Paul was trying to really kind of lay out there is the fact that we really don't have a true honest to goodness Yu-Gi-Oh anime. And the thing is, and I'll get back to that, the fact is regarding Sky Strikers, regarding Yu-Gi-Oh Chronicles as a whole, it was never going to be what I think a lot of people must have misunderstood and maybe even misinterpreted, or just downright, right? Maybe they saw, oh, it's an anime, and just left it at that, and then assumed that it would be handled like most anime. But there are key terms that you are going to hear as a anime watcher, period, not just a Yu-Gi-Oh player or a Yu-Gi-Oh anime fan. But there's going to be key things that you're going to hear in terms of the marketing for virtually any anime out there, and these little key words is going to tell you a lot. So in particular, Konami themselves, they promoted this anime in a very particular way. So I actually have to give them credit here, and I also have to be sympathetic here towards the people that just wouldn't know this. But promotional anime are typically just that. They are solely created for the absolute purpose of just promotion, right? Promoting whatever the product is, which in this case is the card game Yu-Gi-Oh, right? So promotional animes are typically very short-lived in all shapes and sizes and all forms. And not to mention the fact that it was being marketed as a short anime period. These are key terms to look out for. So Yu-Gi-Oh anime watchers, or just casuals, whatever you are, whoever you are, these are things to look out for, because this is probably where the misconception came from and why people were especially disappointed by this, because the darn episode was 4 minutes long. And I'm sure that probably some folks out there maybe expected longer than that. Maybe they expected a good 10 minutes or so. And granted, there are times where promotional anime will have episodes that might be a bit longer. Sometimes every episode will be a different length as far as how long the actual contents of it all is. Sometimes it just varies. It depends. It really does depend. It also depends on just how successful it is in general. As a matter of fact, and I regrettably am going to have to mention this because I have a kind of a bad relationship with this particular anime nowadays, but Dragon Ball, yes, Dragon Ball Heroes, Super Dragon Ball Heroes to be exact, is an anime that I can point out immediately, which was a promotional anime. For all intents and purposes, that was the only reason why the darn thing existed. It existed to promote the game that it was entirely based on. All the storylines, all the characters, everything was based on the video game Super Dragon Ball Heroes, or just Dragon Ball Heroes as it originally was. So this was no different. So that's why this doesn't just surprise me at all. I was not expecting anything crazy necessarily. I just think that a lot of people just wouldn't know what they wouldn't know, especially if they don't watch anime in general. So that is my breakdown of that. Very long-winded, I know. But now we can get back to the important thing, which is, okay, the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, the actual Yu-Gi-Oh anime, which I always make sure to make this distinction now that we have Chronicles as a thing, but the character-driven anime is what people are thinking about probably at this point, including Paul. That's what this is. We do not have a character-driven anime for Yu-Gi-Oh! And that being a thing, which for the first time ever, right, we really don't have any information on a new one. This is a very, very simple thing. I can think of two ways, right? I can think of two ways, and I've actually been probably saying these particular ideas for quite some time now. So I'm just going to reiterate these things because I think it's very simple for Konami to not only save the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, but also to better help promote the Yu-Gi-Oh card game, because there was a period of time where we had sets coming out that specifically complemented where the anime story was in terms of just airing, like whether or not it was Japan or whether it was the English dub game. It didn't matter when it was, where it was. If you were at a specific period of time within the anime, you were getting sets with cards that were based on exactly that particular period of time. So let's say, for example, Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. I think that's a really good example. When we were getting new forms of Utopia, aka Hope for the Japanese watchers, right? We were getting sets that had those cards that Yuma was probably just for the first time summoning or what have you, right? Like this was a normal thing at a period of time, and we obviously don't have that now. And Sevens and Go Rush, which I mentioned in the last videos, talking about all this stuff, right? Like, yeah, no, it wasn't successful. But I'm just gonna say it. I'm just gonna say it. Look, and that doesn't mean that they weren't good shows to watch or whatever, what have you. But they weren't successful because number one, again, they didn't really reach outside of Japan. Like we still don't have those cards. We don't have anything really. Like for the most part, I think we did get some dubbings for them, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember right. Honestly, personally, I couldn't even bring myself to really start either of them. So I'm not going to speak on the contents of how good they actually were, just as shows, period, on standalone as they are. But I'm talking about from a just purely business side of things, they weren't successful. And if they were successful, we would have a third installment in the Rush series, but we don't. We have gotten no confirmation on anything, which is where we get to the real crux of the conversation, the real meat and potatoes of the conversation, which is what do we do with the Yu-Gi-Oh anime? This is very simple. This is so simple. My channel in particular is such a prime example of what I'm about to discuss here, which is yo, we need to go back to the roots. We need to go back to the roots of Yu-Gi-Oh! We need to go back to the actual foundation of what made this what it is. What am I talking about? The Duel Monsters era. Now, I'm not saying we need to do a literal reboot because I've seen that conversation come up. We might need a soft reboot at best, but even then, we don't even really need to do anything too crazy. What we need to do is build off of the last thing that most anime watchers saw in terms of an English dub specifically, besides Vrains, and that's Dark Side of Dimensions. We could very, very easily just continue that storyline. We'd have Yugi as a main character. We know what he wants to do, but we could still see his journey leading up to him creating his own game. So we could still see him playing the card game. We could give him Shining Sarcophagus so that it's at least connected to the current day cards that are being released right now. We literally just got a Dark Magician Girl variant for the Gold Sarcophagus deck, right? And we also have cards coming out for Joey. And I would argue would technically also Bandit Keith because he was the one that had Metal Morph in the first place. But from what I can tell, that seems to be what is the closest thing to a Joey-centric deck, as it obviously is utilizing a lot of his key monsters like Flame Swordsman and obviously Red Eyes, right? So give him that deck. If push comes to shove, give him that deck. And Kaiba. Kaiba's the interesting one. I have said previously that it should be his brand new Advent support, but obviously that would call into question, okay, but then what about the XCs? What about the Synchros and whatever? But here's the thing. There is, and I have to shout him out, the Spell Commander. He did an incredible freaking breakdown of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime and manga timeline. He did a ton of videos leading up to just this basically Avengers Infinity War Endgame style video, right? So look, bear with me on this, right? There's a lot to talk about here. But right, so long story short from his series, and you should just go watch it for yourself, but basically a point that he made in regards to the timeline is his theory was, which I agree with, is that the Dark Side of Dimensions movie is basically a prequel to the Vrains timeline because Dark Side of Dimensions is based on the manga. It's a direct continuation after the events of Duel Monsters in the manga. And not to mention, Vrains is a continuation of the manga storyline if you consider the fact that it didn't have an accompanying manga when the anime was being aired. Which means that it could all be connected. You could totally make that work. So if anything, that would just make things so interesting if Kaiba were to be the one that maybe eventually creates Link monsters along with having XCs and Synchros, etc., right? We could see something like that happen. So I could still argue even now that yo, give him his advent support. I'm sure we could find a way to make it work. Not to mention that we do have other monsters out there that could complement Yugi and Joey's decks that are extra deck monsters in particular that might not just be fusion monsters, if I may say so. But regardless, right? That's one way that I think you could very easily bounce this whole thing back, reconnect the anime to the card game, at least to some degree, because we obviously still get a lot of legacy support. And that way it would solve itself because there is such a massive audience. And again, my channel is such a fantastic example of that. You can go over specifically to either my shorts tab, or you can look at my playlist for live Yu-Gi-Oh scripted duels. And I mean, people still watch this stuff to this day. People love those characters, in particular, the very first original cast of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters era, right? There's a big audience still present for that. So I think you could absolutely do something with that. And building it off of Dark Side of Dimensions, I think, is the best way to handle it. That being said, there's actually a second way that you can turn this whole thing around. It's very simple. Start an anthology series. An anthology series could go on for as long as you'd like. There doesn't even have to necessarily be a cap for episodes. But for those that don't know what that is, an anthology series can basically bounce around throughout different periods of time. If you have an overarching timeline of events that exists within a particular franchise, these types of shows, movies, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is, whatever the medium is, anthology series can go to any points in time and tell stories as canonical installments into the franchise without compromising any of the storylines as they already previously existed. Nothing like that. It's just putting in little bits and snips in empty slots where you would not have seen certain events otherwise, because maybe the anime would have already ended, or maybe you wouldn't see a duel because it happened off screen. But basically, having an anthology series for Yu-Gi-Oh! In particular would give us an opportunity to show off all of the new support cards that have come out for all of the different Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime and spin-off anime characters. You can go straight from Duel Monsters to GX to 5Ds to Zexal to Arc V to Vrains, and if you want to, you can go to Sevens of Go Rush. I ain't gonna tell you no. But the reality is that an anthology series would be fantastic for Yu-Gi-Oh! Not to mention the fact that of all the anime that exists out there, there's one particular anime that has something in common with Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Why am I mentioning JoJo's? It's very important. I'll tell you why right now. JoJo's, right? Every single part in the JoJo anime, for those that don't know, it has a new protagonist each time. There are parts to the series, parts 1 through, technically now we would have 9 if once the anime catches up, but 1 through 9, right? We have several parts that each one has a completely new cast for the most part, with the exception of maybe one character or so that comes back as like a cameo or a supporting role, whatever. But there's always a new protagonist, is the point, right? So Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very similar in that way, where each time we get to a new spin-off, we have a new protagonist with, more or less, a completely new cast. This is perfect though. JoJo's has gone out of its way specifically for one character named Rohan Kishibe, where they've given him some spin-off stuff, and there actually has been other spin-offs, not even just in terms of anime, but also in terms of manga spin-offs that have been made, whether or not they're canon, but that more or less is what an anthology series is. That's what you get in a nutshell, is being able to just put in different installments and show off characters at different points in time. Time where you wouldn't see them otherwise, because the anime would have a strict timeline to keep and maintain and stay intact with, so you wouldn't really get to see much deviation. But that's what an anthology series could do. So we could get all of the new support cards that are coming out for legacy anime characters, etc., and get duels featuring maybe it could be just a 1v1, it could be a tag team duel, whatever the case is. It doesn't even really need to have too much plot in it. Just depends on if it needs multiple episodes to tell whatever story's being told. But the reality is, this is the best way you can save Yu-Gi-Oh! In terms of the anime, but also in terms of the card game. This is how you're going to have sets that are relevant to the anime as it's airing. even to the manga, because you could also have an accompanying manga, which maybe tells other stories and maybe goes a little more in depth on those stories, especially in regards to episodes where maybe it's more so focused on duels that are being had rather than the story that led up to said duels. Regardless, I don't even think there's a debate here. If you really think about it, what's the one thing that we could do that would make virtually everyone happy? Because no matter what particular version of the Yu-Gi-Oh anime you've watched, or if you've watched them all, whatever, what have you, if you've at least enjoyed some of, if not all of the characters and whatnot, you would love this, because you would always have an opportunity to see some of your favorite characters get showcased in an episode, maybe even be the main character of that episode, and get to see their deck as it would be in a different period of time, perhaps with new support. This is how you solve this problem. Very, very simple. But maybe I'm wrong. Feel free to let me know. If you agree, yeah, you might as well go ahead and let me know about that too. That being said, that's my pitches. I have two particular pitches. One is just very simply summarized. Go back to our roots. Let's go back to a Duel Monsters-esque era, and let's build off of what was successful and what already came before. Or we can do that to the 10th degree, and we have an anthology series which could just utilize everything that has already been built up over this massive legacy of 25 years, right, of anime for Yu-Gi-Oh! And just show off the cards that way. It's the best way you could probably do it. That being said, again, feel free to let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you so much if you've made it up to this point in the video just for listening. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, maybe you have more ideas, maybe this has inspired your own ideas of how to save the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, and by proxy, the card game as well. Feel free to share those thoughts as well. That being said, duelists, as always, be sure to stay safe no matter where it is you live or go. Take care of yourselves, both mentally and physically. It is two sides of the same coin. You must take care of both. Again, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Let's continue it, and let's find some answers. As always, it's time to duel.